The Phillips Curve. So back in chapter 4 of the textbook, discussed that labor markets are not ideal markets, and therefore we're going to have unemployment regularly. Frictional, structural, cyclical unemployment. A commodity like stock doesn't face that sort of underuse. Its price just falls enough, so quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. But a lot of other markets are not ideal in that sense. I mean, real estate is not a commodity. Even in a tight market, there are vacant apartments. One tenant leaves before a new tenant can start. That's frictional. In commercial real estate, you might observe vacant locations for quite a while. Storefronts going unemployed, so to speak. The landlord could rent at a lower price, but they don't. Instead, they keep it unemployed. Labor markets involve people, and people are complicated. Wages are sticky. If business conditions get worse, firms do not want to cut employee wages. Instead, they'll fire workers. Gig workers are in a different situation. In that case, they might regularly see their hourly wage change. But most employees are not working gigs. They expect their wages will not be cut. That's just how our society is structured. Plenty of other prices, not just wages, are sticky. A dollar store, for instance, has a lot of marketing centered around the idea that a lot of their prices are $1. That's changed with recent inflation, but it's still complicated to change. Restaurants generally have sticky prices. They don't like to reprint their menus. Granted, more restaurants have menus on a QR code these days. Maybe it will be easier to change prices more often. That remains to be seen. But the bottom line regarding all this stickiness, it flattens the aggregate supply curve. Now, the Phillips curve was proposed by this guy, Professor Phillips. He got the credit. He proposed it in 1958, even though another economist, Irving Fisher, back in 1926, proposed the same idea. He didn't get the credit. It's called the Phillips curve. Phillips said there might be a trade-off between unemployment and inflation. In the graph, we have unemployment on the horizontal axis, inflation on the vertical axis. Unemployment cannot get too low. If we attempt to push it down by stimulating the economy, that will cause more inflation. Vice versa, as inflation gets low, too low perhaps, then unemployment will rise more and more. We can derive this from the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model. As Y gets closer to its potential, then increases in aggregate demand are going to raise the price level more. Now, as usual in economics, we want to take care to distinguish between moving along the curve or shifting the entire curve. If the Phillips curve is given, then policymakers can choose what combination of inflation and unemployment they would like. Some people would like low unemployment, even if inflation is higher. Other people would be willing to tolerate higher unemployment as long as inflation is low. Monetary and fiscal policy choices can move the economy to different points on that Phillips curve. But other policies can shift the entire Phillips curve. Everybody would prefer a Phillips curve that is closer to the axes. If any given level of unemployment came with a lower inflation rate, nobody would want a combination of higher unemployment and higher inflation. Policies like job training might help the labor market to work more efficiently and so shift the entire Phillips curve down. Now, to what extent does the actual data on the Phillips curve look like what we're saying? Here I've plotted the unemployment rate on the horizontal axis versus the inflation rate on the vertical axis. It is not a nice curve. I put the last 10 years in a different color to really highlight that fact. Clearly, there's not a nice stable relationship. There might still be a trade-off. You can draw some kind of downward sloping lines there, but it's kind of tough. Some people propose using the employment cost index instead of CPI inflation, which looks a little better. If you're a real nerd, you might appreciate this. The economist Gregor Smith pointed out that Japan's Phillips curve kind of looks like Japan, if you flip the horizontal axis there. Sorry if you laughed at that joke. You're just a terrible geek.